I'm now about to start a series of videos on Greek vase painting, and we start with what is known as the black figure vases. As you can see, the actual paintings on this vase are black in terms of their colour. Now, in terms of how is that produced, well, the clay colour, the reddish colour that you're looking at, is actually the natural colour of the clay used to make the vase, and then painted onto it is what we refer to as slip, which is kind of liquid clay that turns black when it is baked at very, very high temperatures. And then any pattern that you want to add onto the images, say it will be the Gorgon's wings in this case, we'll have a look at them shortly, or perhaps the hem on the tunic that Perseus is wearing, you would actually scratch away at this liquid clay, at this slip, and reveal that red colour of the original clay beneath it once more. Now, in terms of what this was used for, this particular vase, this is a dinos, and it would have held mixed wine and mixed water at a symposium. So it's got a quite an important function, but this one is so beautifully designed, so aesthetic. It's more likely that rather than being actually used at a symposium, this one was more there for display. Now, something that's interesting in terms of the way in which this dinos has been painted is that it's painted in bands, individual strips or scenes, with only the top one showing a narrative or a story. And it's that narrative or story that we're going to primarily focus on in a moment. But these other bands with floral patterns and exotic animals on, they're a kind of hark back to an earlier period, orientalizing influence of earlier vase painting, and we will see them start to move away from that over time, but these very, very early pieces will still include examples of that. Now, if we go to the top band, the narrative itself, let's have a look at who we can see first of all, and then we can have a look at how the painter has styled this particular scene. So on the far left, we have our winged horse, Perseus, famously born from the decapitated remains of Medusa. So in that case, this is a scene that synoptically makes sense, that Perseus would be there after Perseus has beheaded Medusa. And if we think back to the Temple of Artemis at Corcyra, that was something that temple didn't do, because it had more of a function on Medusa being apotropaic and staring out at us. Next to Perseus, we've got Hermes. We can tell it's Hermes because he's got the caduceus, the staff with the two snakes in his hands. He's also wearing his traveller's hat, and he's got those winged boots or sandals on. Although I should point out, many of you will notice that they are also present on the Gorgons and on some other figures as well on this scene. And in these early archaic vases can also be a reference to the fact that somebody is moving. It's like a symbol of movement. So it's also worth looking to make sure that Hermes has other attributes before you identify somebody as Hermes purely from that particular fact. Next to Hermes, we've got Athena, very, very covered up and cloaked in that heavy drapery there. And then centre stage, with all of the attention on her, we have got Medusa. And Medusa is seen falling to the ground. And this helps to break up the monotonous processional feel of this narrative, because you'll notice the other figures are more stationary. Okay, so she just adds a little bit of variety in terms of pose. Whilst we're focused on her, let's just have a look how the painter has added pattern as well. So we've got beautiful etched detail in the wings there, and in the archaic period the wings of Gorgons are always shown curved in this way, almost like scythes. We've also got pattern etched into her drapery. And also just look at the stump of the neck. These little spikes are no doubt the painter's way of showing blood spurting from her neck in that moment at which she has been beheaded. Next to her then, we've got one of her sisters. And if we went further around this vase, we'd see the other one as well. Now, both the Gorgons, very interestingly, face the viewer. And yet their bottom halves are in side profile. in a running kneeling pose. That's how we refer to it in the archaic period, to show that they are pursuing Perseus. But the fact that their upper body twists to look out at the viewer again shows us that they are meant to be apotropaic. And in terms of pursuing Perseus then, this adds an extra element to the narrative. It's something that we didn't see at Corcyra, the aftermath of that moment, and it adds a bit more drama to the scene overall. And then there's Perseus. And again, very similar in terms of how he's styled really to the other figures. He's in the exact same running kneeling pose as the Gorgon sisters. His clothing, the tunic, is very similar patterns. He's got the winged boots or sandals on there as well. And notice as well, in terms of anatomy, our figures have particularly long fingers and toes. Elongated fingers and toes are something again that we see as typical in the archaic period. Finally, one other thing that I just wanted to point out to you that was really interesting, and I'm going to nip back to this, is if you go down 2 bands below Medusa herself and look directly below, you'll see there's a very small female figure, also in a running kneeling pose between 2 animals. And this is the Mistress of Animals motif, which can on occasions be associated with Artemis, but also with Medusa. And in that case, we would see a little bit of linking between the pattern, the other bands, and the narrative at the top, especially because that Mistress of Animals is directly below Medusa herself.